Welcome to the Brewing Wellness Podcast, nourishing UFT members, one conversation at a time. Brewing Wellness is a podcast created by the UFT Member Assistance Program to support the mental health and well-being of our members. In order to do the work you do every day and be present for your loved ones, students, and patients, your cup has to be full. Brewing Wellness focuses on mental health and wellness topics that can help us all thrive in our professional and personal lives. We'll be releasing a new episode on the last Monday of each month. Remember to listen to the Brewing Wellness Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And please, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's get started.
Hello, and welcome back to the Brewing Wellness Podcast hosted by the UFT Member Assistance Program. My name is Diane Yotis, and I am a Victim Support Liaison, Health and Safety Representative for the Queens UFT. Today, I am joined by Lexi Muley, a licensed mental health counselor and an expert in dialectical behavior therapy, which we call DBT. As we close out March, it is the perfect time to talk about how educators can take care of their mental health, especially in a profession as demanding as teaching. On today's episode of the Brewing Wellness Podcast, we'll be diving into the core skills of DBT: mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness, and how these tools can help you manage stress, prevent burnout, and build stronger relationships with your students and your colleagues. But before we dive in, Lexi, how are you today?
I am doing good. Thank you so much for asking. I was just talking to Tina and telling her that I've been very tired since the time change. So it's only 1 hour, but it totally throws off my sleep
That was a couple of weeks ago.
I know, it still throws me off. But overall, doing very good. Thank you for having me here today.
Great. We're happy to have you. So we'll dive into our questions.
Sure.
For those listening who may not know anything about you, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how you came to do it?
Absolutely. So as you said, my name is Lexi Muley. I'm a licensed mental health therapist specializing in dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT for short. I started my own private practice, Wise Mind Counseling, or we go by WMC for short, back in 2017 here in New York. And we offer both DBT groups and individual therapy for folks struggling with emotional dysregulation. And in these days, it can really show up in a ton of different ways. It could be things like borderline personality disorder, substance use, eating disorders, self-harm, or honestly, just feeling like your emotions are just running the show in a way that makes our clients every day feel very difficult for them. I've been in the mental health field for about over a decade now, and I was so drawn to DBT because I love how practical and skills-based it is. It's way more than just gaining insight, which a lot of therapies are about, gaining insight, and that's great. But DBT is more about building a toolkit of strategies that actually help people create these lives that feel more stable and fulfilling to them. And I've always been passionate about working with folks who feel a little bit maybe misunderstood or feel like they've been too much for the people in their lives. And I really think that DBT gives us a framework to build a life worth living, which, by the way, is kind of like the DBT slogan, if you will, build a life worth living. Quick little fun fact, I actually started doing DBT in my own mental health personal journey with anxiety when I was a wee gal at the age of 15 years old. So I have a lot of not just professional experience, but personal experience. But lately in my career, I've been focusing more on teaching and sharing this fabulous modality with other clinicians and providers by doing workshops. So that's a little bit about me there.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
You stated that you specialize in DBT. What exactly is DBT, and how can its skills help our school-based professionals manage stress, emotions, and relationships in their work?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And so DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy. And at its core, honestly, it's all about balance, balancing acceptance with change, emotion with logic, and flexibility with structure. It was originally developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan in the 80s, and she was working with primarily women with borderline personality disorder. But over time, we've realized that these skills are so helpful for anyone who just needs a little extra structure in their life, who needs to get through with these moments of emotional dysregulation. And for school-based professionals, whether it's teachers or counselors or administrators, these skills can be a real game changer when it comes to managing stress and navigating emotions. So for example, mindfulness, right? That's one of the core pillars of DBT. It can help us professionals stay pretty present instead of getting caught up in the frustration about what happened earlier in the day or what could happen later in the day, which is a real struggle, I imagine. I feel like in the hectic days of like the schooling system. Distress tolerance skills are great for handling moments like when a student's having a hard time or a parent is upset or you're just feeling completely overwhelmed and you need a way to ground yourself instead of acting impulsively. Emotional regulation skills can help us avoid burnout by teaching us how to manage our emotional exhaustion and try to build up a little bit of emotional resilience over time. And interpersonal effectiveness, this is actually my favorite module. These are the best skills for setting boundaries, having healthy conversations with colleagues, difficult conversations, I should even say, making sure that your relationships with students, colleagues, and even parents stay healthy and productive. So in short, while DBT was designed for clinical therapy settings, these are really just life skills, honestly, tools to help people handle their life just a little bit more smoothly.
So schools can often be fast-paced and overwhelming. I have actually been a teacher for 18 years, and I'm in this
Oh my
position
God.
for 10 now. And honestly, I can say that each year it seems to get more stressful in the
Mhm.
school environment with both the kids, the parents, like you said, and the educators that work with them. What are some simple mindfulness practices staff members can use to stay grounded during the school day?
Absolutely. First of all, that's amazing. 18 years in teaching. That's wonderful. That's huge. And I think so. I don't know it as well as obviously you know it, but I imagine that schools are very fast paced, right? There's a level of multitasking required that's probably very unreal. And I'll say this now and I'll say this always. I have so much respect and love for teachers and all school admin for how much they have to juggle on a daily basis, right? It seems like a lot. And like I said, I've never been in a school setting, but I imagine it's probably very easy to feel like you are constantly having to put out a ton of fires and never really getting a moment to just breathe, right? So mindfulness, for a lot of people, weirdly enough, they think it's like meditating in a field with daisies, like with the sun shining on them. And that can be definitely a form of mindfulness and meditation. But the truth is that actually mindfulness is a ton more accessible than that. It doesn't have to be this overly complicated, complex thing. There are so many quick, realistic ways that anyone can reset during the school day. And this actually includes students too. But one of my favorites is actually called One Mindfully in the Moment. It's a simple choosing of one of the small things that you have to do on your to-do list and doing it fully, completely. Taking all of the other things that you have on your to-do list and saying, I'm picking one of them and I'm setting them aside. Because it's like one of those mornings, I talk about this in my webinars that I do. At the end of my day, I hang up the phone, like for work. I'm done with work, right? I call my mom. I turn on my TV shows. I'm cooking dinner, and I'm also going through emails. I'm doing all of them, and I'm doing them all kind of like half. You know what I mean? Like half-assed, if I may say that. Like I'm not really getting into any of them. I'm missing emails. I'm maybe overcooking my dinner, and I'm getting annoyed. So one mindful essentially is saying take one of those things, pick one of those things, and stick with it. So for example, like if you're drinking coffee, pick just drinking your coffee instead of coffee and emails, right? Like actually taste it instead of gulping it down while checking those emails. If you're walking down the hall, just noticing the way your foot feels as it hits the floor and instead of running through your to-do list or looking at your phone, you know? It's these tiny moments help pull you out of autopilot and give your brain just like a tiny little bit of a reset, if that makes sense. So that's one of them. Shall I go on to another? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say I'm an elementary school teacher, and
Oh
I
boy.
think that the most people that contact my department for support are our elementary school teachers, especially our K to 2 or pre-K to 2 level
Mm.
teachers. And I think that's a great strategy because they have to accomplish a list of things during the day. In fact, they have to post it. It's called the flow of the day.
Oh my
And they
God.
have to get through it on time, which is a
Ooh.
lot of pressure by the
Yes.
end of the day. Because if you can imagine, if a 4-year-old has a meltdown,
Oh my God.
then you're not on schedule and you're panicking because you're worried someone's going to come in and see you're not on schedule.
Oh.
So I think that picking what you need to accomplish for the day or what you need to focus on or what you can eliminate is very good advice, because it focuses people, teachers, paras, whomever, on one thing and not so much on it's 10 o'clock and I should have been at my 1 o'clock
Exactly.
schedule.
Oh man, that sounds like a
So
lot of pressure.
that's a helpful point, especially when you're with those same kids all day and you need to focus on what might be important for the day.
That's so fair. That is a lot of pressure on you guys, and the fact that you have to like post it somewhere too, so like people know where you are in your to-do
Yes.
list. Essentially, I will say that look, there's a time and a place for multitasking. I think that completely makes sense, and if anyone needs to multitask, you should. But if there are moments where there's like, okay, I'm feeling very overwhelmed, and I have like 12 things I have to do. I'm trying to do all of them at once, and I'm doing all of them a little bit incorrectly because I'm not focusing really too well on all of them. Take a time and just pick one of those things. If I could be a little cheeky for a second, the way I teach it to my clients is I literally say like, don't do 12 things half-assed. Pick one thing and do it with your full ass. And like I joke, but like that's really how it is. It's like pick one of those things and just go that way. And then it feels like you got a little sense of accomplishment with it, and it kind of just allows you to focus on the one thing instead of be, flustered and scattered with 12 others. So could be helpful. Another good one I like is 5 senses grounding. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay, so this is where essentially you can name. So some people call it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, meaning you name 5 things that you see, 4 things that you hear, 3 things that you touch, and then so on and so forth. Right? I don't care about all the numbers. You don't have to do like that many numbers of it. You could just say list all the things that you hear, list all the things that you see, smell, taste, and touch. And by doing that, it only takes a minute, but it can really help put you back in your body when you're feeling overwhelmed and stimulated, just as a kind of like internal inventory of like, where am I right now? Like, what am I doing? Okay, take a second. I'm looking. I see a blue wall. I see a white outlet. I hear my voice. I smell the cologne or the perfume on my shirt, right? Just to take a second to just reorient yourself back into your body. It sounds silly, and a lot of these skills I'm going to tell you about today are going to sound a little silly, but they really do work if you give them a shot. So that's another good one. I don't know. What do you think about that one?
No, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of when they have the not timeout corners, they're like reflection corners that some teachers have in the classroom for kids, and they just go and focus on either the pictures or the fish or the flowers, and that just takes them down a stress level when they're having some kind of emotional situation they're dealing with. So sounds like it works for adults too.
Absolutely.
And you could focus on something that can help you to distress at the moment.
It's like focusing on like what's right here, right now. And I'm going to be honest with you. A few weeks ago, I was having an anxious moment, and I was like, I need to just like kind of woosah, like kind of come back to myself. And I really did do this. I use these skills all the time. And I was like, all right. And I was in my apartment. I was just sitting, and my mind was racing, how it goes with anxiety. And I just started thinking like, all right, what can I see? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I touch? And as I was doing that, you want to use your descriptors actually as you're doing this too. You don't want to just be like, oh, here's like a chair. You want to say like, here's an orange chair and it's like soft and it feels like felt, like what, or not felt, cotton, like whatever, right? You want to go ahead and describe it as much as possible. And it does just kind of slow down the brain a little bit, because the thing is, your brain can't focus on 2 things at once 100%. Like you can't focus 100% on your anxiety and 100% on what you're seeing, right? So you can delegate some of that energy a little bit into, okay, what am I seeing? So instead of 100% on your anxiety or overwhelm, it's only 80%, because then 20% is over here to this very neutral, benign thing that's not overwhelming. I'm telling you, it's, again, silly, but it really works if you give it a shot.
Wow. Sounds like it does work.
Yeah.
Because it takes your mindset and it splits it up.
Exactly.
And this way you're not focused on just one thing.
Exactly.
So you're saying even if you count the tiles on the ceiling, you're focused on something.
Literally, that's exactly it. And it's so funny because so many people think these skills are so silly to use that they're almost like, it's like, I'm not going to because I don't think they're going to work, until they do them. And then they're like, oh my God, this actually works. I can't tell you how many phone calls I have with clients where they're like, I did that thing and it's annoying, but it worked. And I'm like, I know it works. Try it. The other thing I would say is a mindful breath. Again, one of those things where it seems very simple, but just really a long inhale, hold for just a second, and actually a longer exhale. I recently learned this, that the body is in the most calm state while we are exhaling. So if you stay in the exhale longer than the inhale, you can slowly start to regulate your nervous system physiologically, and you're stimulating the vagus nerve as well. So there's a thing called 4-7-8, 4 in, hold for 7, exhale for 8. And that, if you do that for about like 4 or 5 minutes, you should, at least physiologically, start to come down a little bit. Your mind might still be going a little, but it will start to take the edge off just a bit.
Start to calm your body down.
Exactly.
And that you can do without anybody even knowing you're doing it.
You could do it in the middle of a meeting. You could do it talking to a kid. Doesn't matter, right? Totally easy and accessible stuff.
That's something you can do and no one even knows you're doing it.
There you go.
All right. Schools can be unpredictable. That's for sure. And educators often deal with very high stress situations. And I have to say, I think our kids deal with a lot of high stress situations as a result of the educators dealing with them. What distress tolerance skills can help them manage frustration and overwhelming in the moment?
Absolutely. So I can imagine that's exactly right. Schools are unpredictable and educators are constantly dealing with the things that they didn't plan for. Like you were saying before, like you're doing your to-do list and a kid comes in and is having like a meltdown, right? Or an upset parent that you didn't account for that day, or just the sheer mental load of the job, right? Stress is inevitable and it's going to happen. But this is honestly where distress tolerance skills can definitely help, because these skills are essentially designed to help us get through tough moments without making them worse. And when I say making them worse, what do I mean? I just mean without reacting in a way that could be potentially consequential or damaging, like snapping at a child or sending an angry email or things like that. You know, the things that we all do.
Right.
But one of my favorites actually is called TIP, and that's an acronym. In DBT, we have tons of acronyms, which is silly, but that's just how we like to remember things. It stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and PMR, which is progressive muscle relaxation. So essentially the idea is if you're feeling overwhelmed or on the verge of snapping, or you're just feeling like you want to do something impulsive to maybe temporarily quell your frustration and the overwhelm, T, the first part, temperature, is asking you to hold on to something cold for like 5-10 minutes. And again, I'm being a broken record here. I know it sounds a little silly, but if you have, do you guys have access to like, yeah, you have like ice? Could you like go grab ice from like the teacher's lounge or something like that?
You could,
Something?
Most people have refrigerators in their classrooms or
Perfect.
their lunch cooler, whatever.
There you go. Okay, so something like that. Or it could just be like getting like a cold water bottle. So what you could do is you can hold on to it. And the thing that it does is it triggers what's called the diver response. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
It's so interesting. So you know those guys who like are in the polar bear club, the guys that like go out and they right. So they're onto something, because what they do when you dive into cold water, or some parts of your body are submerged in very cold water, it triggers a diver response, which is this physiological built-in survival mechanism that we all have, where it basically says you are feeling cold, prioritize the organs that matter the most and shut down everything else. So what it does is it sends blood and oxygen and prioritizes the heart and the lungs, and not so much the frontal lobe of the brain, which is where we feel overwhelmed and stress and freaking out, right? All of that. So it kind of, in a way, like short wires the frontal lobe, if you will. Like think about it. Like think about the last time you jumped into like really cold water. Like were you just like, oh my God, this is all I can think about, right?
Right.
It's uncomfortable. But that is something that you can do. And again, holding ice just for a few minutes, you can actually do this thing, the vagus nerve. So you know the vagus nerve, it goes right down the center of the chest there. And I'm saying this for our listeners because I know you can't see what I'm doing with my hands. But if you hold like an ice pack on your chest, your vagus nerve is largely in charge of regulating our parasympathetic nervous system. And so if you hold ice on your vagus nerve for about like 5, 10, 15 minutes, the longer the better, you will start to notice that it will start to slow your breath, slow your heart rate and your pulse and your pressure, your heart blood pressure, and it'll start to take you down in those overwhelming moments. But again, that's hard to do when you're like very wanting to react quickly, right? So but that's one of them. What do you think about that?
No, I think it took me a long time to learn not to react to a text message or an email immediately, to turn it off and wait an hour and then respond, because you want to respond. And that was a lesson I learned a while ago. So those are some good techniques that people can do just to add to that strategy of waiting.
Yeah, it's girl same though, because it's so hard to not want to react to those moments, right? And especially if you're facing them on like a daily basis and you feel like, okay, I've had enough of this. Especially if your battery is very low, meaning like your your cup, so to speak. We say we can't pour from an empty cup. If you're already on E and then something happens and you get a really nasty email from like a parent or a colleague, that's going to set you off, right? And so, and it's in those moments where we want to sit with that and not make it worse. And then make it worse for ourselves is maybe responding impulsively. Another one, and you kind of just said it actually, is called STOP. Again, another acronym, but it's good for when you're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed. And this is perfect for all my like impulsive folks. So it stands for STOP, meaning literally take a second, do nothing. Like I tell my clients, like no sudden movements, stop. Take a deep breath, that's T. O is observe what's happening inside. So your thoughts, feelings, sensations, what's happening externally, your 5 senses. And then P is proceed mindfully. And that's where you want to choose how you want to respond to the situation rather than just react in whatever moment you have emotionally, what you're feeling like you want to do. And so, it sounds simple in a way, and it is, but it honestly can make the difference between snapping at a student and handling a situation in a way that you won't regret later. And in the P, the proceed mindfully, I always ask my clients to ask themselves, what action can I take that would definitely make the situation worse? And what action can I take that might make the situation better? And I have them kind of like think about their goals and their values in that moment and decide, all right, if I snap, here's what will probably happen. The kid will get even more upset. I'll have to deal with that and I'll have to calm him down and yada, 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 whatever happens there. If I take a deep breath and I go over and I nurture and comfort and help him use his skills, maybe he'll start to relax, calm down. We have a bonding moment and then we go back to the lesson plan. Something like that, right? I will tell you though, all of these skills, it is not as easy. I'm saying it like it's so easy to do them, right? But it's like any other skill, like learning the guitar. Like when you pick it up, you're going to be trash at it for like a while probably. And like that's okay. Like you got to learn to build your calluses and do all that. These skills are exactly the same. It takes a little while. So if there's times where you want to practice stop and you find yourself still being impulsive, be gentle with yourself. It takes time to do these things.
Takes time.
Tons of time. You said before, it took you tons of time to learn to like pause for an hour before responding to a text. Sometimes I'm not even like all that with it enough to pause. And I've been doing these skills for over 15 years.
So it takes some practice time.
Tons. It's like any other skill.
So that seems like it would help with people. Many teachers, I ain't guilty of it, are multitaskers. So that's sometimes when you respond in a way you don't want to respond because you're busy focused on something else and you're saying, oh, I have to deal with this now. So you just respond to it. So that stop method will prevent you from responding too quickly or for reacting too quickly.
Theoretically.
Because you're doing, you're doing so many things. Sometimes you're like, I have to do another thing.
Exactly.
Or I have to respond to another thing or handle another thing. So stopping and probably prioritizing too.
Oh, that's good. Actually, I was going to tell you that before when you were talking about the to-do list, right? And we were talking about like one mindfully. You can pick like what is most important for me to do right now? What is on a time-limited basis, right? And what can I take care of maybe tomorrow? What's a tomorrow me problem, like compartmentalizing in that way. No, I completely agree. It takes time. I mean, if you are somebody who feels like you are quick to respond to your emotions, which I am in many ways. Like I've learned more now doing these skills, but I think at the beginning of my journey, I was very quick to get a text and be like, no, like I'm not okay with that, and like respond right back, right? Or my poor parents, I love my mother so much, but she'll say something and it just will annoy me, and I'll be like, what the heck are you talking about? Like I'm very quick to respond. Right. And it always makes the situation worse because she's a sweetheart and she's only just trying to help. But taking a second to be like, pause. It's like Seinfeld. Did you ever watch Seinfeld?
Yes.
Serenity now. It's like taking a moment, say serenity now.
Exactly.
Just taking that quick moment there. And then there's one more. Should I share this other one with you? Okay. There's one more I wanted to say about distress tolerance is radical acceptance. This one is a game changer for things that are completely out of your control. And I will say, and I say this to everyone when I talk about this skill, it's one of the best, but one of like the hardest skills. So it's kind of like, okay, things you can't control, like when the Wi-Fi goes down in the middle of like a lesson, or you're stuck in another meeting that probably could have been like an email, right? Things like that probably happen often. Radical acceptance doesn't mean you have to like what's happening. You just have to accept that it is. Because the thing is, in DBT, we have this quote where we say, where you fight reality is where you invite in suffering, right?
Mm.
So if you're staying in a place
That's
of,
great.
isn't that interesting?
Very
So if you're
interesting.
staying in a place of like, this shouldn't be happening, I shouldn't have to deal with this, this is so frustrating, you're creating this whole space in your brain where you're kind of going like this. You're like combating yourself versus saying something like, okay, this is happening. I don't like it. What now? What next? What is the next thing? And it can help you move forward instead of getting stuck in that frustration and the shoulds and the shouldn'ts of work, colleagues, students, and all of that. Again, you can see why it's the toughest thing, because it's like pushing against directly what we want to do as human beings. When we meet something that we don't like, it's so easy to get caught up in the this shouldn't have happened, or like this isn't fair, right? But radical acceptance is kind of like a way of saying, again, it's almost like the Serenity Now,
Right, Serenity
but
Now.
it's very much like, okay, this morning I wanted it to be a smooth morning, and it hasn't been, and that's okay, right? And what now? What next? What happens next?
What next?
It's tough though.
Tough.
Mm.
I agree with you 100% on the fact that it's tough.
Once again, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Brewing Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the UFT Member Assistance Program to support the mental health and well-being of our members. If you are a UFT member, the Member Assistance Program can be reached at 212-701-9620 or by emailing mapinfo@uft.org. And once again, please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening.